Welcome to the second part of my life and the tapestry that God is creating. My brother was born 11 months after me, um, and my sister 11 years after him. So now let's look at junior school. I left primary, and because it was the time when there was lots of births, we had to travel by bus to a school about 8 or 9 miles away in a place called Moreton. And we went to a school called Barnston Lane, which basically was an old school made up of um, wooden buildings painted bright royal blue. And for me, it was an enjoyable place to be because I loved going to school and I loved to learn. And my favourite teacher there was Mrs. Mortimer, and she was kind, encouraging, supportive, and I remember that if you did something well, then she'd reward you with a little sweet called a dewdrop. And if you were really good, you get 3 or 4 of them. And they were like squidgy little sweets covered in sugar of different flavors, and that was really good. The head teacher there, Mr. Macklin, he was also a very nice gentleman, and he recognized when he was teaching English that I had good handwriting and good English skills. And he told my mum and dad that he felt that I was going to be a writer in the future. That all went to pot when I went to secondary school, when you had to write so much faster, it just went down the pan after that. But then during the second or third year of school, some of the kids burnt the school down. And so we had to go further up the road to Lingham Lane School, uh, which was similar but not quite. And it was a concrete, a bit like Burkett actually, concrete and breeze blocks and all that sort of stuff. And we used to have to meet in the local Methodist church when we had assemblies and big events and exams and all those sort of things. Not a lot happened, really. I was still in the choir. Uh, a church, and my brother decided to join, and it became evident quite at a young age that I was a bookworm, a bit of a swot, loved school, was absolutely hopeless, hopeless at sport. I remember we had an inter-schools Scottish dancing day, and all the classes had to learn Scottish dancing on this huge field at Lingham Lane, and it was quite an event, I can assure you. From junior school, I then progressed to secondary modern, and I'd done my 11 plus and was borderline, and my parents, and I think rightly, decided it was better to be head at the top of a secondary modern rather than the bottom of a grammar. So I went to St George's School, um, also in Leeso, which was on the main Leeso Road. And it was an interesting experience. Part of it was an older building, because it used to be a school for girls. But next to it, they'd built a new building. And this was quite an incredible thing in that the new building was completely powered by solar. The front of the building faced south, and it had a walkway in between the glass wall and the other side, so you could walk inside. And in the winter, they put silver paper down to reflect. And in the summer, they put black paper down inside these channels, which went all the way up the school. And we had radiators everywhere, which were fueled by oil. And we had these doors, which were quite thick with rubber seals. And as they closed, they sealed the whole school. We had windows that opened like this. So they opened inside, so only let a little bit of fresh air in. And we never, ever, never had to put the heating on. In fact, sometimes in the winter, when it was snow outside, we had to open the windows and sometimes even the doors because it was too hot. The first solar school. It's also interesting that the council lost the plans. I think it was for about 30 years until they discovered them years later in the basement of the town hall. But it was a nice school. It was spacious, modern, so you felt that it was really good. But it was also a challenging time for me at school because I was the boy who wore a frock on a Sunday because I went to church and wore a cassock. My brother at the time was also in the choir, but because of pressure from his mates and doing football and all the rest of it, he dropped out, but I carried on. And so secondary school started a period of relentless bullying. I remember because I was so rubbish at sports, being humiliated because I couldn't play football. Nobody had taught me football. I didn't understand it. I didn't know the rules, and I didn't have the foot-eye combination you're supposed to have. I was a bit better at rugby because they actually taught us how to do that. And I remember we were in a classroom upstairs, and some of the classrooms had interlocking doors, so you could go through one classroom into the next. And we had no teacher there. And some of the usual suspects grabbed hold of me and tried to take my trousers off. Thankfully, I was able to escape through the door into the next classroom. On another occasion, we were in the playground and somebody had a Woodbine cigarette and they shoved it in my mouth, held onto my nose till I inhaled and started coughing and spluttering, and then shoved me in front of the headmaster. Hoping that I'd end up in detention, but fortunately, he knew me because my mum was on the Parent Teachers Association. I knew that this was completely out of character. His name was Mr. Bradshaw, and he was brilliant. And he had a handlebar moustache, and we used to call him Sam because he was like somebody, a comedian of the time called Sam Costa. And he used to walk up and down the corridors jangling his keys. So if you heard his keys, you knew you had to get out the way and run. And so after those incidences and many others were, for example, they stole my rucksack, which had all my books in it, and they went and threw them over fields all over the place. And my mum had to come and help me recover them. So I decided that I had to do something to not be in the playground when all these thugs were around. So I approached Mrs. Griffiths, who was the music teacher. I wanted to learn to play the piano, really, but that was something that they didn't offer. So I was given a violin and started taking violin lessons and was able to go into the school during the breaks and lunchtime and practice killing a cat on the violin. It was really interesting because I enjoyed it, but was not very good at it because I couldn't read music. I remember when the Prince of Wales was invested in Carnarvon Castle, we had a special event in school, and I was part of the orchestra, and we played "God Bless the Prince of Wales" on our instruments. We also did a play called The Wizard of Oz. You know, we're off to see the wizard. In the summer holidays, it was quite a challenge to keep out of the way of the thugs because some of them just lived not far from where we were. And so I volunteered with the science teacher to look after the newly born rabbits that had been born in the science lab. And from there, I became friends with the caretaker. And over the summer holidays, the 6 months, 6 months, 6 weeks seemed longer. I was young then. I helped him with lots of jobs, and I remember waxing and buffing up the whole of the assembly hall over the summer holidays, as well as looking after the rabbits. We ended up with one of the rabbits, Penny, but then we discovered when it escaped, it actually was a George. And so next door weren't very happy when they discovered that they had a shed load of little baby rabbits running around everywhere. I also started to do the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. And from that, one of the things you had to do was learn how to cook, which was great at night class. So I used to go to home ec in the evening once a week and learn how to cook. Because I was probably a bit of a loner because of all that was going on, I made friends with one young person who was of mixed race. He was an orphan and he'd been adopted by somebody around near where I lived. And so I became friends with him, and he used to come to our house and do homework. And then one day my mum noticed that he went home a different way. He went round to the right down the road rather than over to the left where his house was. And then a couple of days later, I was summoned into the head teacher's office saying that I'd bullied somebody and taken money from him. Anyway, my mum came in and was able to testify that she'd seen him go around to the right rather than the left. And it transpired that he was bullying a young boy and demanding money off him and saying that it was me. So I wasn't very good test of character. I also remember that when I was in home economics, that and I used to love doing the things there. I was accused of writing F off on somebody's rucksack. And the person who it was for was also a friend of mine who was a traveller. I think we called him a gypsy in those days. And they blamed me for writing this on his rucksack, which I hadn't. Anyway, I kept out of the way for weeks upon weeks. And one evening, a gang of lads, about 12 lads, came to get me from night school and took me to a field where this lad was standing and he was going to fight me. Well, I wasn't going to fight him back because I hadn't done anything and I hadn't done what they'd accused me of. And he started hitting me. And they were all screaming, fight back, fight back. And I wouldn't. But I had this green duffel coat on. And what he did was he pulled the hood over my head. Now, years later, I'd been locked in a war wardrobe. We were playing Doctor Who and the TARDIS, and I was locked in. And I was so panicky in there that I ripped the doors off from the wood frame. And so pulling this over my head, like a claustrophobic reaction, I just belted him. And that was that. I got home, I had a big lip here like this, and my mum said, what happened to you? I said, oh, I walked into a lamppost. She didn't believe a word of it, but that was it. Thankfully, after that, they didn't come near me in the same way, but subtly, in other ways, they tried to undermine me. And also, one of the things was I was really good at English. And Mrs. Murch, who was the deputy head teacher, she used to teach English. And I was at least a year ahead of everybody else, and they resented it. And so she put me in the stock room next to the classroom so that I could do other work that a year ahead of everybody else, which just created a lot more resentment and increased the level of bullying significantly. I also used to do woodwork and metalwork. I was absolute rubbish at metalwork. I wasn't brilliant at woodwork, but I remember making a rabbit shape and putting it on wheels, and then my dad finished it off and painted it so that I could give it to my sister, who by that time had been born. And I suppose that's one of the only things that I created. My mum and dad also were on the Parent Teaching Association, and the school had bought a derelict school in Wales in a place called Nantir. And my dad, being a plumbing and heating engineer, he was able to salvage sinks and toilets and all that sort of thing from when he was doing his work and taking them out. So he'd clean them up and take them to the school and then install them. And then we used to go for weekends away. And that's, in fact, where we went when we did our Duke of Edinburgh's award. And so I was doing the Bronze Award. But in those days, it was cooking, first aid, and the 16-mile expedition and other bits and pieces. But there was one element of it which was sport. And as I've said to you before, sport was not my forte. And you had to run a certain length in a certain time, and I could never do it. So at the last hurdle, I was not given the bronze Duke of Edinburgh because I couldn't fulfill that last requirement. The school is still there, but it's closed down, reopened as a school later, and then it's latterly become a place where small businesses are. I also remember going on what they called a marathon, which was a run, and we ran from the school along the sea edge up to the end where Lisa is and Morton, and then back to the school. That nearly finished me off. But while I was there, I had a little job. I think I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I used to work in a butcher's shop on the estate where we lived, and used to work on a Saturday and clean all the chopping boards down with these metal scrubbers, and wash all the knives and all the other things. And then I got a job at Atkinson's, which was a grocery store, a family-owned grocery store, a traditional old-fashioned grocery store. And I remember that the stock room, when it was working in the summer holidays, in the stock room, it was an absolute tip. So I decided off my own bat during the summer holidays to tidy it up and organize it, you know, to make it easy to find things and all the rest of it. And I found open tins of meat, empty bottles of pop, and all sorts. Showed this to Mr. Atkinson, and then we discovered it was the other chap who worked there, who'd been helping himself during his breaks, and just so Mr. Atkinson wanted me to train as a manager for a store, but at that time I was too young and did not understand and didn't know what I wanted to do. Latterly, before leaving school, I decided that I didn't want to carry on with sixth form college. And so at 15, I left school, having decided that enjoying the home economics so much that I would train to be a chef. And so I went to Birkenhead Technical College to learn under the principal, Mr. Jonquier, who was a Belgian-French gentleman who was a chef, and we learned how to cook and serve French style, French recipes, French silver service, and also how to serve drinks, as well as rotating between cooking in the kitchen and then working in the restaurant and serving. We also had demonstrations and practicals and exams in the other kitchens. And downstairs there was a bakery, so we learned how to make bread rolls and all that sort of stuff. After that ended, a 2-year course, I had Sitting Guilds 150, 151, 436, 460, which is basic catering, advanced catering, hotel management, and hotel bookkeeping reception. And so pursued from there to train to be a hotel manager. They were enjoyable days, but because of my experience in secondary school, I needed to get there early and left a bit later so that all the crowds had gone. While we were there was an incident outside the bakery when we were waiting to go in before the lesson, and we were all in our chef's whites with our tall chef's hats on, and some thugs came up the stairs at the back where we were waiting and started a confrontation with one of my colleagues and asked whether his head went to the top of his hat, and then thumped him. We went through quite an investigation and the police came in and all sorts. So I was always wary. So I used to come in on the number 77 Birkenhead bus and get to the college at 7:45 in the morning. And the only person that was in there was the lady who looked after the restaurant kitchen. And she used to do all the washing up and cleaning and everything. A very nice spinster lady. And I got really well with her. And then the tutors said, okay, you can write the menu on the board in French before we start, because I was always there. And did really well. In the lunch times, next to the college was the college hall, and we used to have concerts and all sorts of stuff in there. But also they had a trampoline, so I used to go into and do trampoline because they had very high ceilings. which was enjoyable. So that's my school life. From when I left primary till I went to technical college. The next session, I'll be looking at my time with the church. Remember that when I was very little, 4.5, 5, I joined the choir at the local church. And that runs alongside. So from the period of leaving primary school to leaving to go the further education college, I also had another existence, if you like, at the church. So the next session will cover that. So until next time, it's a big God bless you from me, Greg. Bye.